Thank you. Well, thank you, Susan. And I'm so sorry I missed the awards earlier today, but I do want to quickly say I have been a huge supporter and an advocate and proud advisor to the Overseas Vote Foundation from the very early days. And I can't speak highly enough to Susan and Claire and Marina and Jane's work and so many of the volunteers who've been a part of it as just a motivated group of citizens who want to see our democracy more inclusive. And they're tireless and they're persistent and they're inspiring. So let's give Susan, if anything, a round of applause. So I know Peter, who I have great respect for, is an incredible researcher, but as he noted, he's not a millennial. So I'm here to actually respond to any of the allegations that he or you raise and speak directly for my generation if you want to have questions for me. And I'd actually like most of this time today to be question and answer oriented, but Susan has prompted me with the task of identifying what obstacles encumber a more participatory and engaged democracy or citizenry in my generation, and how I can offer some insights into how we can create obviously a more ubiquitous culture of civic involvement. So with that said, I first actually want to say, as Peter did, that youth voting is up, as you guys know, in 2012. We were thrilled that younger people were 19% of the electorate, which is certainly bigger. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm part of the largest generation in history, the most multicultural, the most highly educated, and a generation who has totally different viewpoints in how we view globalization, how we view different cultures, and how we view social tolerance and acceptance among each other as citizens. So I think that will bode well and certainly change the course of how we vote and participate over the next few decades as we come of age and become an even larger share of the electorate. Secondly, I want to say that despite many young people not voting, I do not believe in the concept of youth apathy. In other words, I think every younger person in their teens, 20s, believes and cares deeply about different issues. The question is whether, and that, by the way, is evident through not only the volunteerism rates that Peter suggested, but the fact that we're starting businesses and nonprofits and that we've basically created this whole new culture of social entrepreneurship, which is unique to our generation. But I think it's entirely possible that the notion of democracy and the vote in particular, which is our prime measure of democracy, is becoming a somewhat obsolete measure for a generation who has unprecedented agency through technology and social media. And I don't just say this as someone who uses and lives online and spends a lot of the time of my day interacting with fellow members of our organization and my generation online, but I say it as someone who also did study sociology in college and recognizes that the rise in technology is absolutely going to create an instant gratification-oriented culture where we have a culture that is fundamentally at odds with our legislative process, such that I can walk into any store and or fast food restaurant and get a meal instantly, such that I can go online and search for something on Google and get information immediately, such that I can certainly hit an app on my car, on my iPhone, and have a car or an Uber cab or taxi next to me, waiting for me within minutes. So when we have this unparalleled agency and result oriented culture through technology, as you can imagine, when we vote by proxy, or when we essentially then tell representatives to vote for our interests through a divided and, one could argue right now, certainly stymied government that does not yield immediate results, that creates certainly a legislative process that is confusing, antiquated, and certainly at odds with the general technological culture that my generation participates day to day in. But that is not by any means to say that we do not care and we're not interested. We're looking for a way to innovate our democracy, to bring it more into the 21st century. So that said, I think first and foremost, our organization, and I'll figure out how to use this slide here, spent a great deal of time, I'll get back to those if I can, spent a great deal of time registering voters in a fairly new way. I would actually make a bold assertion that the campus voter registration drive, as you might know it, is slowly dying, if not dead. And that's because the way that organizations like OurTime.org or like Rock the Vote or a lot of these youth civic engagement organizations, OVF, are registering, and YVO are registering people, is by embedding their voter registration tools online in the already saturated places where young people live. So our organization's strategy this year was to build this online voter registration tool that we were able to put on the homepage of Starbucks.com, as you can kind of see, even though I'm sorry it's not bigger, or the front page of Tumblr, or under every single politics article on Huffington Post. We were able to convince those sites that get massive traffic and distribution among younger people that if they embed this tool, they will get not only more impressions and eyeballs, but will create a much more accessible way of young people to register. So by virtue of saturating these online sites, here's karmaloop.com, meetme.com, which did homepage takeovers around National Voter Registration Day, Upworthy, which is a great media site, all did pop-up boxes for us to help us register voters. So when historically we would put our time into forming chapters and trying to get campus reps around the country to go door to door or lunchroom to bookstore and register people, now it was more about us wrangling the CEOs of media sites and sometimes major Fortune 100 or 500 corporations to feel a sense of obligation to create voter registration opportunities through their web platforms. So I think to the extent that we can create a culture that not only encourages our businesses and our social media sites and our media destinations to engage more heavily in online voter registration, but then of course you go through the notion of graduating to a more inclusive 50-state culture of allowing online voter registration, not just in roughly a dozen states that have it now, you will see voter participation certainly become easier, which will correlate with the ease of use society that we have, which is to say that I can, of course, bank online or order a cab through my iPhone or certainly get any result I want on the web within seconds. So that is definitely one. That said, and I know there's been many debates, especially among probably this community, of whether we should vote online. I will say I think the tides are going to eventually get there. However, I'm very dubious, of course, and concerned as you are about the security measures of online voting right now. And I think we have a long way to go to be able to show that it's not hackable or certainly prone to any sort of malfeasance or manipulation before we go toward direct online voting. But in terms of online registration, I'm a huge advocate, and I think it's a no-brainer. And I would even, as our organization and most young people we've talked to do, support federal legislation that would take us in that direction. But in the meantime, we'll certainly encourage more states to follow the suit of the first few that adopted that. The next thing I actually want to say is regarding motivation of younger voters. And Peter touched on this for a brief moment, but policy barriers were a huge frustration to my generation this election. Particularly the notion of eliminating early voting days, the notion of photo ID restrictions, the notion that we, of course, were told as students were that if you live in a dorm, that does not constitute a proper address. And then as we've recently seen, the long lines, those policy barriers play a very frustrating role in encumbering turnout and also demonstrating that we have a long way to go to reform the system to welcome more younger people to play a part in it. And so I think that is one of the bigger focuses we need to have as a society, which is how do we create and optimize access? Because like I said, culturally, we're moving toward ease of use and access in every other part of our existence except for democracy. And in fact, we have been regressing in the sense of a policy standpoint of how easy or difficult it has been to vote. The last major demotivator for my generation is the broken political culture we live in. And I don't know if this has been given a lot of attention today, but the notion that you have flooded money into the political system, the lack of disclosure from people who do put unfettered amounts of money into the political system, the notion that money today is speech, and corporations are people, creates a sentiment that I can back up with fact and data, not just an opinion, that many young people feel if money is in fact speech, then the rich have more of a voice than they do. Because economically speaking, not only are we a cash-strapped generation, but we certainly face disproportionate amounts of unemployment, underemployment, student loan debt, credit card debt, and so forth. So if we need money to speak in our democracy, then our democracy is actually no longer one person, one vote. And I think until we take on a more comprehensive view of government reform, of making sure that people disclose the money and that we have campaign finance reform, we're never going to boost voter turnout because people are going to fundamentally assume that the system is rigged and that their vote doesn't count. And so that needs to become something that GOTV and voter turnout advocates focus on heavily as a major barrier toward our participation. The last thing then in terms of moving toward rather from demotivators from the part of our broken political culture is the notion that we have such stridency in our political debate as well. Our generation rejects the notion of this us versus them culture that we have in our cable news. The fact that there is a false dichotomy, the fact that there are two sides to every particular debate or issue. And the more that we polarize our society and the more that we hear the party's pure purpose to be to win re-election and defeat the other rather than collaborate, we also lose a motivation and belief in the competency of our leaders and of our government, which of course will also in many ways cannibalize voter participation. So it's really critical that as voting advocates we fight that culture and stop looking at things such through this false binary paradigm that I and so many of my peers fundamentally reject. So now moving toward how we can get more younger people motivated, first of all, besides reversing those negative trends I just said, one is certainly better outreach. And I want to actually congratulate candidates over the last few presidential elections on both sides of the aisle that they've started to pour more money into youth outreach. They've started to appoint particular campaign staffers whose sole purpose it is to break down how policies affect our generation in a more salient language. And they've certainly put more money into youth voter registration drives. Because as Peter can tell you, as can I, the number one indicator of whether someone is going to vote is if they are asked to do so. And believe it or not, there are millions of my peers who are never asked or never directly messaged about being, registering and casting a ballot. So that is critical, and making sure that politicians not only go to where we live, which yes might be on campuses or in concert venues, but is also online through these websites that we're showing you here today, and through the celebrity Facebook walls and pages that we use from Will Smith and Lady Gaga and Usher and Will.i.am, to make sure that you're using culture, which does lead politics, as a major means of reaching our generation as well. But not to in any way belittle the fact that younger people might need culture to reach them. Believe it or not, we also care very deeply about issues. And the issues in this election that I was earlier hinting at, which will definitely demonstrate the shift of where our generation's ideology is can really be exemplified through 3 particular ballot initiatives that were on several states throughout the country. One is versions of the DREAM Act, which over 60% of young Americans support. It is irrational to a multicultural generation that if you were in fact brought to this country at a very early age, that you cannot be a citizen of this country, even though you had no choice in the matter of being born here. Secondly is marriage equality. As certainly the president said in his inauguration address, to our generation and in our culture, the notion that you cannot express who you love openly without, equal protection under law is insane, and close to 70% of young people support marriage equality. And that's becoming such a no-brainer that if you're on the wrong side of that issue, you're probably going to start to get attacked from our generation because we view equality in a very aggressive light. And part of that same version of equality has a lot to do with income equality, because the income divide in our country, which was exemplified through Occupy Wall Street, was also one of the most motivating factors for younger people showing up. But the third real issue that over 60% of young people uniquely support, compared, or is juxtaposed against seniors, is marijuana legalization. And that was heavily supported from our generation, not just as an indication to the fact that we may or may not like to get high, but more importantly, a fact that it has it's a pragmatic means of reducing our deficit because we spend such a costly war on drugs. And of course, it breaks down so discriminately in the way that it disproportionately incarcerates black and brown men for these minor drug crimes. And our generation is acutely aware of that, partly due to our diversity and just partly due to our pragmatism. So, with that said, I have some other things to say, but I'd much rather get to questions because I feel like I have potentially, hopefully, instigated some thought or controversy, which is what I'm always trying to do. So thank you very much, and I welcome questions. Yes.
So thanks to online wizards at OVF and FDAP.gov. Thanks to online wizards at OVF and FDAP.gov, it's now and the electronic transmission requirements in the MOVE Act, it's now easier than ever for overseas voters to vote. The one remaining barrier to helping overseas U.S. citizens vote is getting them to start the process early enough, early like in January. And so overseas voting assistance essentially becomes a matter of communicating with young people. And so how do you effectively communicate with young people as government entities when trying to get them to follow the State Department or FVAP on Twitter is like trying to get them to friend the IRS on Facebook? Yeah,
it's a great question. And it's not just the State Department or particular commissions. All of government has a difficulty reaching our generation. And certainly we communicate with different departments, agencies, and the White House in a nonpartisan capacity with how we can bring information to people. But I think there's a few answers to your question. One is the person who transmits the information. The fact of the matter is peer-to-peer outreach is critical for this generation. We do not necessarily love getting information from our parents or our professors or certainly different government agencies so much as we like looking at how we dissect issues through the vantage points of our friends. And there's no better indication into that than Facebook and Twitter, in the sense that when you scroll down a news feed on Facebook, you're seeing what your friends have to say. So I would say optimization or optimal use of social media and making sure that you're actually reaching out to nonprofit organizations like OurTime.org or like any of the many other groups who work with younger Americans to be your resource for basically communicating the information you have. We're here to help in any way we can. It's part of our mission to engender a greater culture of participation. But past that, I'd also say employ these same websites, these same celebrities. I actually have a video here. I don't know if one of them plays. We used Chelsea Clinton. You don't have to put on the sound. We used Steve Carell. We used Larry David. We used Usher. We used will.i.am. We used so many different ambassadors from music and sports and movies to help basically give the same information you're trying to give, which is how do you register to vote, when is the deadline, and where can you do it. So by all means, employ culture and social media to the greatest extent possible, and also third-party groups who might have more credibility among our generation. Yes?
Matt, did you go after the overseas vote? That's question number one, the youth overseas. And then to follow up on this question, most of the young overseas voters that we've found through Democrats Abroad are students abroad. They don't go for the year anymore. They go for the semester. So it means when they want to vote in November, they only arrive in September or October.
Yeah.
So we can't start in January with most of these people. They're not there.
Yeah.
They don't arrive until later. So two parts of the question. Did you go after the overseas vote? And how can you help us go after the overseas vote?
Great questions. First of all, the answer is yes. And as Susan alluded to earlier, it was primarily through our partnership with OVF in the sense that our website and voter registration tool that lived on all those different media platforms, the first link on it was, "Are you a voter overseas?" ? And anyone clicked that button was forwarded directly to OVF to register. So primarily through linking people online, we were very concerned about the overseas vote. And to Susan and her team's credit, everyone had a great web experience on that site. But secondly, the best way to accomplish your latter objective, believe it or not, is something that I like to call institutionalizing voter registration with college campuses. And I'm a huge supporter of weaving in voter registration with college enrollment and matriculation and class registration every single year. This has been approached actually through federal legislation at one point in a bipartisan way. Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and Congressman Stephen LaTourette of Ohio did introduce a bill called the Student Voter Act, which would essentially designate publicly funded universities and colleges, which is roughly 99% of them, as voter registration agencies for enrolling people. But you can also get at this not through federal legislation, which is just by pressuring college presidents and registrars to make a much more good faith effort to use their bully pulpit, for lack of a better word, as a means to educate their students who are either going abroad or enrolling every year about their responsibility to register and how you get it done. So we aggressively target the administrations of colleges, and we've asked our Congress to work with the college presidents in their district for that particular purpose. Yes?
Matt, I appreciate your enthusiasm, and like you, I got civically active as a teenager. And in the course of my working with the Marine Corps, one thing really popped out at me, and that is that while our college and university student rate is fairly significant, it is not the majority of the young people you are talking about in society. They work on farms, some of them work in factories, they work at gas stations, they work at fast food chains.
Some of them don't work.
And some of them are not working, and they're still living with mom and dad. And my son came home from college, and he's on his third job. Fortunately, he's just moved out, so the nest is empty again. Thank you very much. I needed that break. But I just want you to exercise just a touch of humility by realizing that all wisdom of your age group is not contained in just those students who go to college and universities.
Yeah,
there's wisdom out there all over the place in your age group.
And I completely agree with that. And actually, we registered more non-college voters than we did college voters, primarily by using the social media and pop cultural engines we did. And that's why I actually believe it's critical that more groups start to move toward those mediums, because, and why I earlier said the campus voter registration drive, which you might conceive of as the archetypal student or youth voter program throughout this country is slowly dying, because now you do not need to go on a college campus, which used to be the only place younger people congregated, as the primary engine for reaching them. So you can absolutely go to concert venues and pool halls and wherever it might be, but the best place is through Tumblr and Reddit and Twitter and Facebook and all these social media sites where 93% of our population spends 10 hours per day. And that is a fact. Yes.
Hi. I was going to ask...
How many more? Just one more? Yeah.
How many more people have questions? Bo over there, yeah.
I was going to ask a question, but actually it turns out I'm going to give you information.
Great.
I was, just so you know, the Higher Education Act requires all the schools that accept any federal funding of any kind.
To provide a good faith effort, but they're not enforcing it.
I know they're not.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about your opinion about them enforcing it.
Yeah.
And, but it is out there, and
exactly.
We've had a lot of luck locally providing people with postpaid cards that right in their student mailboxes, and a lot of them come back. It's been.
I'm a
successful.
huge fan of that, and thank you for doing that.
And that's something I know that military voters get to do that is not applicable elsewhere in our system.
Yeah.
Great tool.
I mean, you're absolutely right. There is a proponent of the Higher Education Act that said that any school should provide a good faith effort to register voters, yet obviously good faith is very different than requirement. So we've seen some schools do an excellent job of registering their students, and some surprising, many community colleges have led the way at that. And then colleges you think that would be do an exemplary job of registering their student voters have barely done anything. So I would support, not only more good faith provisions, but Mr. LaTourette, formerly Mr. LaTourette, and Ms. Schakowsky's bill that would put some real teeth into that provision by making it a requirement akin to motor voter. So.
I think Bo has a question. Yeah, last
Sure.
question.
I can project, thanks. I'm voters with the National Campus, there we go, National Campus Voter Registration Project. Matt and I know each other, we go back ways. And just a couple things. One is College Campus has been engaged in this for a long time, and so much to the degree that you heard earlier that college students vote overwhelmingly more than non-college students, so we're doing a good job of that. But also, we partnered with Overseas Vote, just as your group did, to make sure overseas students could register to vote. Kids in America and kids overseas. I do find it ironic that we got engaged in this before it became mandatory, because for us and for young people, I thought young people don't like to be told this is what you have to do. So we said, when you tell people, well, you have to provide voter registration forms, the way to do that is, well, put it in a mailbox, put it out, and just kind of get the forms out to people. We said, no, that's not the way to do it. Part of what the mission of most public-private college universities is civic engagement. That's part of what their whole core mission is. And so they've been very creative in getting students involved in not only just registration, because we think that's just only one piece of it. We think it's education, registration, education, and then getting them out to vote. And as you heard all day, they actually turned out to vote. So I'm just, I want to pat all those involved in higher education on the back, because I think we've done an exemplary job.
Amen. Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Appreciate it.
Great. Let's thank Matt Segal. Outstanding.
Thank you. Appreciate it.